If you have your Bibles open still at 1 Peter chapter 3, that's where we will be for pretty much the whole time this morning. 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter is written by Peter to the dispersion. If you remember kind of going back in your first century history, the church started in Jerusalem, and it started really big at first. You had Peter's first sermon, in which while everyone is teaching, all the apostles teaching, that first day 3,000 are baptized. And from there it just grows and it grows and it grows till there's thousands of people in this one Jerusalem church. Everyone together, they're listening to the apostles' teaching. You have the apostles giving the exhortations and telling them what they should live their life. Everyone had everything in common. They were sharing their stuff together. If anyone had need, people gave of their means to help each other. And can you imagine what the singing would have been like at that church with thousands of people? But that didn't last forever. Persecution happened. And Saul, whose name would eventually become Paul, was a part of that. And from that persecution, I think it was part of God's plan. But as a consequence, all these Christians that were in one place spread everywhere, to all corners of the world, including to the part of the world that Peter is writing this letter to. And instead of having that great big community and having the apostles teaching you the Word of God and having all of this, instead it's really small clumps of people. Most churches at this time would probably be no more than 10 to maybe max 50 people. And that's most churches being probably just 2 to 4 families. And so you didn't have this great collection of people that you could rely on. And instead of the apostles giving your teaching, instead it was you kind of getting together and just trying to figure it out on your own and reading the Old Testament. And maybe if you got a letter like this one from Peter, you would look at that. But you're just trying to get by. And then on top of this, the neighbors that you have, the Gentile and the Jewish neighbors you have, are not treating you the best. The people this letter is written to were suffering persecution of various types. They were getting taxed unfairly. They were getting unfair treatment from their neighbors. It would be very hard to keep that hope and that energy going forward to remain strong in that situation. It was a lot easier when you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people and it seemed like everyone was on fire. It's a lot harder when there's not as many of you. You feel alone in the world. Melvin Curry once said that 1 Peter is a letter of how to get home from here. That this is not your home. This was not their home. They were in a foreign land, as we are in a foreign land today. And we are longing for a home. There are passages when you grow up in the church that become very familiar to you. I think the one in which we just read is very familiar to those who've been in the church for a long period of time. You look at it and you're like, and what you think and how we usually use this passage is we need to always be ready to make a defense for the hope that's in us. We need to be always prepared. We need to know our what the gospel is. But I think it goes even beyond that. And I think the main thing that Peter is trying to get across here is that we need to have a mindset of hope in our day-to-day life. And so he lists about 3 things, 3 different mindsets that I believe that we need to have and to have hope in our day-to-day life. The first one is in verse 14. When it says, "But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you'll be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ as Lord, as holy." He's saying don't have the mindset of fear, but instead have the mindset of honoring Christ. Do not be afraid. And because he tells you not to be afraid, because you must cast fear out of your life. Because if fear is what you're thinking about, that's what you're going to always be concentrating on. Fear is actually a defense mechanism that we all have. It keeps us from doing stupid things. If we men have a little bit less fear than women, and thus we die of stupid things a lot more. But it keeps you from, when you're on a height, to be careful. When there's a great big fire, it makes you careful not to get burned. It does things so that we don't die because we are not paying attention. However, it becomes a problem if fear dominates our life. If that becomes our sole way of making decisions. If that is how we make everything in our life, if that becomes what we think about. Because instead of having Christ as the thing that's foremost in our life, in our mind, we focus on that fear. And if you focus on that fear, what is going to determine your decisions is, how can I avoid that thing that I fear? Instead of doing what Christ wants me to do. So he says, don't fear, instead honor Christ. This word honor also means sanctify or holy or treat it set apart. That's kind of the idea here. It's the same idea that he talks about just the chapter earlier in 1 Peter 2:9, when it says, but you're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people set apart for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That passage meaning you've been set apart by God. You're his special people. You're his own people for a special work. But notice that it doesn't say that we are set apart or we are sanctified. Instead, it says we are to sanctify Christ. So it goes both ways. Christ in chapter 2 sanctifies us for a special work. And then in chapter 3, he says we must sanctify Christ in our minds. He needs to be set apart in our minds. Because it's not about us. Christ needs to have the foremost place in our minds, that whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we say is filtered through him. And it's one of those things that's a lot easier to say than actually to do. It's a lot easier to say, yeah, Christ needs to be the foremost in our life. Yes, I believe that. Christ needs to be in everything we do or say. Yes, totally believe that. But do we do it? Do we do it in everything we say, everything we watch, everything we do? Is Christ in our minds when we make those decisions? If you do not have Christ in your life, you will not have a hope in your life. When everything is going wrong in your life, you will fail. You will not have that hope if Christ is not in your life foremost. In the next two lessons, we'll look at how to spread that hope to others. But for now, I want you to ponder, and as we sing these songs, to think, is Christ the foremost person in my life, who I make all my decisions with, and what I do, what I say, and what I think? Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. We talked about in the last talk how we need to cast all fear out, and instead have Christ as front and center of our minds. And that should take place in what we do, what we say, and what we think. And I forgot to mention that he just got finished talking a lot about a lot of the ways, if you have Christ first in your life, how that influences your life. In your relationship with your family, in the relationship with your boss and your master, in relationship with authority, and as you are to be a holy people and put off all fleshly things. So we are supposed to do that. And I think that's one of the sources that we get to maintain our hope. But this hope should not just stay with us. We should spread it to others. And I think that's why he goes on to say what he says in verse 15. But in your hearts, honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason of the hope that is in you. Always being prepared to make a defense if anyone asks you for the hope that is in you. And the first question I think you've got to ask if you look at this is the hope in you? It seems like an implication that you could take from this is that for someone to ask about the hope that's in you, you must have a hope that's in you that's obvious for people to ask. I feel like that's pretty obvious. So do you have that hope in your life that people can see and tell a difference that's obvious for people around you? You know, this person is just a little bit different. And I think that's why it comes right after honor Christ in your minds as holy. Because I think that's part of how that comes through. You act different with your family. You act different with your spouse and your boss. You act differently with those people in your life. And you look different. And if we look at it, he defined in 1 Peter chapter 1 what exactly that hope is. In 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 13, it says, "Therefore prepare your minds for action, being sober-minded, and set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." That's where your hope is. It's on the grace that was brought through Jesus Christ. It's on the gospel, if we shorten it. That is where all of our hope is in. And it should influence us and change us to show people who we truly are. Why are you a follower of Christ? I think this kind of goes back to what was said at the Lord's Supper talk. I think we were thinking along the same lines. Is it just because your family has always been a follower of Christ? Is it because that's just the church you're a part of? Is it because your friends are here? Is it because that seems like that's the thing to do, or that you feel like you'll get good karma, or you just want that free ticket to heaven? Why are you a follower of Christ? And if it's not for the gospel, I believe that's going to have an impact in your life. If it's not for Christ, that will have an impact in your life. Because if it's any of those other things, you won't have a conviction for what the gospel is. You won't have a conviction of the gospel, and so it's not going to impact your life that much. But if you are a follower of Christ because you know how much you've sinned, because you know how much you've come short of God, you know how many mistakes you made, your weaknesses in your life, and you realize, I can't change it. No matter what I do, I can't totally make it undone, the sin that I have done. But thank goodness for Jesus Christ, who saved me from sin, who loved me so much that he would come to the earth and die in the worst way possible so I can be forgiven my sin, and then I can be in heaven face to face with God and have an intimate relationship with God, which would have never been possible except through Christ. If that is your hope, can that not change how you live your life and influence your thoughts and your actions and everything you do in your life? And this goes beyond just your morals. I used to just say, like, I used to be a drunkard. I used to be greedy. I used to be materialistic. But I'm not those things anymore. It goes beyond that. It must change your attitude. I used to be negative and pessimistic and complaining and think the world was falling apart. But now I have hope that there's another place coming. And that even though it seems so dark and so down and the world is so chaotic, I know someone is greater is in control. And even if everything in my life seems to be falling apart, I know my soul is saved. How can that not give you hope in your life? And so what comes out of that, I think, is what he first talks about, being prepared to make a defense. Always being prepared. Do you know somebody that's always prepared? Maybe it's that man who always has the right tool at the right place. He always has like everything in his tackle box in the back of his truck. If you need something, you go to him. Or maybe it's the mom with like the purse that has everything that you possibly need. You need gum, she's got it. You need a hot dog for lunch, she's got it. You need whatever you need, she's got it in that purse. Preparation, the thing with preparation is you can't prepare when you need it. Preparation starts way before you actually need it. And so if you don't know what your defense of the gospel would be, that defense of the hope that's in you would be right now, I would suggest prepare. Because if you don't know that right now, you can't wait until someone asks you and be like, just a minute, let me go prepare. Because that opportunity may pass you by. And this word defense, it's the word in which we get apology or the apologetics. It's a defense. It is giving evidence for, giving a thoughtful response of. You're giving a thoughtful response of why I have this hope. It's the reasons I have this hope that's in me. If you're not able to make a defense for why you have that hope that's in you, how strong is that hope then? If you're not able to give a defense of why you have faith in God and why you trust in His Son for salvation, if you're not able to explain why you have that hope, do you even have your own faith? Or are you just relying on someone else's? Now, I'm not saying that you need to be able to answer every single question that somebody will come up to you and possibly ask. That's too much. Even the greatest minds, I think, of any time would be a bit struggle to be able to do that short of Jesus. But you should have a basic sense of why was I baptized? Why am I saved? Why do I put my hope in the gospel? Why am I living my life this certain way? And be able to reason out fundamental truths of the gospel. Our hope is built on evidence. It's not built on false hope. It's not built on fairy tales. It's not built on imaginative stories. It has evidence for why we believe. And if you don't have evidence for why you believe, I would suggest trying to find it. It's out there. I'm willing to help you. I know there's other members here that are willing to help you. Having a faith, a background, an evidence for why you believe. Paul reasoned with those people around him. Jesus reasoned with his followers. The church of Berea searched the scriptures daily to try to see if those things that were true. On the road to Emmaus, Jesus reasoned with those two men from the scriptures, telling them basically the Gospels, and they said, didn't our hearts within us burn? As he explained to us the scriptures. There's evidence for why we believe. And there's evidence that God is real, that Christ is real, and that He died for you, and that you need Him. Do I have a hope in my life that people can see? Am I prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks? What can I change to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for the hope that is within you? Think about these things as we continue our worship. We've seen how this hope should affect our daily lives, our thoughts, our actions. And we've seen that because of this hope and because of how our lives have changed, that people should ask us why we have such a hope. And then finally, in this last section, I just wanted to look at the attitudes that we should have and how we share this hope. If you look again, we'll start in verse 15. But in your hearts, honor Christ, the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet, Do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience. He gives three ways and reasons, kind of three attitudes that we're supposed to have behind when we do this defense for the hope that's within us. And let's start with that last one, having a good conscience. That our life should reflect what we're saying. If we're making a defense about the gospel, our life should be proof that the gospel has changed me and that we believe what we're saying. And also how much of a shame it would be of a person that promotes the gospel, that teaches other people the gospel, that evangelizes and maybe even saves other people. How much of a shame that would be for that person to be a hypocrite in his life and miss out what he gave so many other people. And so he says, live with a good conscience. Have a good conscience. Don't be a hypocrite, but have a good conscience. And then really quickly, the last two, with gentleness and respect. With gentleness and respect. There's a certain way in which we need to communicate this hope that's in us. Paul was very concerned about this in many of his letters when he tells people to teach the gospel or to admonish certain people because they're not living up to the gospel. He always makes sure to do it, to tell them to do it in a respectful, gentle, patient way. He does this many times in 1st and 2nd Timothy. He does this in Galatians. He does this over and over again. People cared how other people were taught the gospel. It matters not just what you say, but also how you say it. Aggressive arguments intended to humiliate others rarely help people find that hope. And telling people all the reasons they're wrong and all the reasons I'm right rarely gets them a place of hope. Or telling them all the reasons why I'm going to heaven and you're not rarely gives them hope. Even those things may be true, that may not be the best way to communicate that hope to anyone. Any approach that's not done in a loving way, not rooted in love, is an approach that is not correct. The goal is not to win an argument, but a soul. There is a reason that the Jerusalem church was said to have favor with all the people there. And telling someone about the hope should be a positive thing. Like, we have the greatest news that anyone could say. That we have a loving God and that He cares about you and that He died for you and that you can be free of your sins. That is the greatest news in the world. It should be consumed in positivity. Yes, there's a negative impact or element of it that you were in sin and that you are in sin and you need to be forgiven of that. But it comes with the answer to it. That there is purpose in this life, that there's meaning in this life, that you have value. So many people are seeking that in their lives today. That you matter. Because God thought as much of you to die on the cross for your sins. We have the best news in the world. That should influence how we say it, as well as our life. We should live our daily life with joy. I hope that you have the gospel, the hope of the gospel in you. And I hope that it's revealed in your day-to-day interactions in your life. That people can tell that you have this hope, and that I hope people ask you about that hope. And then I really hope that you do it in a manner of gentleness and respect, and that you have a good conscience. That you're living a life that is up to par with the gospel, doing the best you can. And so even though that the people that Peter was writing to in 1 Peter were going through so much in their life. They've moved recently in their life. They were away from a lot of the people they counted on. they may have been feel very much alone, just them and their small group in their church, and feel like the world was against them. Peter says, you have much reason to hope. You have much reason to live a life that is according to that hope. And you have a great opportunity. Because hope shines the brightest when you should have no reason to hope at all. It's easy for people to see the joy in you and when things are going well. When everything's going well, yes, people think he's got plenty of reason to live with a joy about him. But when everything is going terrible in their life, when everybody's going terrible in your life, when you live with hope, that's going to make a tremendous impact on others. And so my encouragement for you this week, this month, this year, this decade, whatever, is to live with that hope. Always having that in mind so that people can see it and you may be able to tell them so they can live with hope. And that it will just cycle on. If we could do anything for you this morning to help you, to any questions about the gospel, to get your life out of sin, we invite you to come forward as we stand, as we sing.